Thanks for clicking on Wayne.com for this week's edition of Inside the Zone. Justin Kinney joining us as always, showing off the legs this week for the folks at home. That's why they click in. This is a viral moment. All the ladies from Northeast Indiana clicking on it, saving it. Bookmark.
Check out these pasty
download.
whites.
Exactly. Speaking of this week, conference play begins in earnest for most conferences. The SAC, it begins, but because they're playing cross-division games, just like when the NECC plays big division versus small division, it's not going to count in the standings. So let's start off with Northeast 8 play, because
let's do it.
That's where our highlight zone game of the week lies. DeKalb at New Haven. I think New Haven has lived up to the billing.
So far, so good.
And DeKalb has been a surprise team. Both are 2-0 heading into Friday's matchup. How do you see this one playing out, and what about these teams has impressed you thus far?
Well, I think the way that DeKalb has come out the first 2 weeks and played well, Aiden Lytle really settling in. As good as Tegan Irk was last year, they have now not an appreciable drop with Aiden Lytle coming in. Maybe doesn't have the weapons that Tegan Irk had, but DeKalb through the first 2 weeks of the season has looked pretty solid. And that is an offense, that has a good running back as well, has some talent on the outside, Caden Pettis as well. So we look at DeKalb, and they're one of the teams that wants to prove that, hey, they belong in the conversation towards the top of the NE8 as well. If they can go in and win, or at least have a respectable showing against New Haven tonight, Friday, it'll go a long way towards that.
New Haven hasn't been challenged, and they've done it. It hasn't really been the Mylan Graham show or the Johnny Washington show or the Donovan Williams show. It's been some of the ancillary guys. Because I imagine, in part, because the defense is trying to take away those guys, and in part, it's easier to run the football than to throw it to a certain degree. So what have you seen, Trey Bates being an example, especially in week 1, what have you seen from New Haven? And this will be maybe a bigger test than they've seen so far, and it also counts as a conference game, and they are thinking NE8 title at New Haven this year. Yeah,
it's so tough to get a read on New Haven yet, right? Because they played New Haven and Northrop and Bishop Luers, and both of those teams, at least through the first 2 weeks we look at, are down in the SAC. So I think this is the first time we'll look at New Haven and say, all right, this is going to be a legit chance to see what they are on both sides. We know what to expect offensively, but defensively, when that team has to face a really big offensive front, which DeKalb has, and being able to get off the ball, and can they get pressure consistently on Aiden Lytle and really disrupt things for DeKalb? I think this is the first time where we can look and say, okay, New Haven, are they a complete football team, or are they a benefit of their early season schedule? This will be a good indicator prior to them playing the likes of Leo, Columbia City, and East Noble.
Speaking of all those teams in the Northeast 8, Columbia City at Belmont, Huntington North at East Noble, Leo at Norwell round out the Northeast 8 schedule. Columbia City would be a heavy favorite. East Noble would be a heavy favorite in that one. Leo at Norwell. Norwell has struggled 0-2. They went down to Delta last week, and obviously Mississinawa in week 1 in a close ball game at the Courtyard. But Leo looked pretty good last week.
They did.
Against a solid Angola club. What do you see from the Lions that you like, and what makes them, along with East Noble and New Haven, do you think that they can compete for the conference title? Are they maybe the team to beat in the Northeast 8?
Man, it's so difficult because you can make a case for each one of them. You can go Leo after last Friday's performance and say, okay, they're the team to beat. Columbia City is over there say, hey, look at us. We're dominating 2 opponents to start off. East Noble saying, yeah, we took it on the chin versus Snyder, but is that going to make us better for conference play? Because they looked really impressive in week 1. So you could make cases for a lot of different teams in the NE8, and we talked about New Haven as well, and DeKalb. But for this one, when you look at Norwell, and they were the class of the league for the last couple years, is graduations hit them hard, injuries have hit them hard. This is a team through 2 weeks of the season have given up 57 points. They didn't give up 57 points through the first 11 weeks of the season last year. So you look at Norwell and saying, man, it's a completely different team, but that dominance we saw defensively from the last 2 years, it's just not there. And that's a byproduct of attrition via graduation and injuries.
Yeah, for you, I don't know how you look at it, but to me, the NE8 might be the most interesting conference race. There's a couple games in the SEC. We're all looking at Snyder Carroll for the big division of the SAC. And I think the small division will be decided. That'll be an interesting race as well. But, like, as far as the number of teams that can compete for a conference title in the NE8, like, that's the one to watch this year.
Yeah, you feel like every week you should have at least one matchup in the NE8 that's intriguing, particularly earlier in the season when we haven't had any teams separate themselves or 2 teams separate themselves in the NE8 yet. you're looking at the SAC and you're already looking at like, okay, big division, that looks like Snyder and Carroll, right? Small division, Wayne, Northside maybe could be that game. So you're already pinpointing a couple games in the SAC, even without us playing any conference games yet, as this is what it's going to come down to. But the NE8, it's a crapshoot right now. We'll get a better idea now as we get into conference play with them.
ACAC conference play begins this week, although Adams Central opens with Blackhawk Christian. We got Woodland at Heritage, South Adams at Bluffton, Jay County at Southern Wells. I mean, you take a look at this conference. I mean, it's AC's conference to lose, I would assume, is the way most people look at it after back-to-back trips to the 1A state title game. And they've done nothing in the last couple of weeks to make it think that there's going to be a drop-off of any sort for the Jets.
You hope that another team can come in and challenge.
Yeah.
As good as Adams Central has looked, they don't look like dominant Adams Central, and that's because we put the bar so high for Adams Central is when they're not beating everybody by 50, you're like, what's going on? But you look at Bluffton and just the dominance they've had over the first 2 weeks of the season. We know South Adams could be that team. Heritage was really impressive in that win over Fairfield, which we expected to be closer than it was. So we're kind of looking at it and going, okay, could one of these teams maybe sneak up on Adams Central and at least give them a game into the second half? And that's what the hope is. And I think similar to where the NE8 game of the week is DeKalb and New Haven, this week I think you look at the ACAC and go, okay, South Adams, Bluffton, could this be a decider on who could maybe be the biggest contender for Adams Central down the line?
And how do you see this South Adams Bluffton game playing out? Because as you mentioned, Bluffton has been dominant, but they've beaten Northfield and they've beaten Manchester handily. It's going to be a tougher task against South Adams. How do you feel this one is going to be playing out? Obviously, South Adams opened with they don't have any home games right now.
Right now, no. They're just waiting for that turf to get done.
Yeah, so they played, Belmont at Adams Central last week, and then the week before they played at IWU.
Yeah.
So they're kind of a question mark. Not that they aren't good. We just we have some. I don't know if we have a good grasp on what they are quite yet.
Yeah. And what team they could be on the turf in Bern.
Yes.
Right? Because of their athleticism there. So when you look at this is Bluffton has scored 14 touchdowns on 14 drives this year. I guarantee you if that streak continues, they win on Friday.
Is that good?
I don't know. I think it's pretty good, 14-14. But when you look at Bluffton, is they've been able to dominate the teams they should. Week 1 was impressive because it's a Northfield team that shut them out last year in week 1. So Bluffton returned so much, they've really hit the ground running after last year's sectional championship team. Is Bluffton, on paper, you look like the most complete team that Coach Kunkel has had in his tenure at Bluffton? And could that mean they could really give South Adams a game and maybe even knock off the Starfires? Because for so long we've been, okay, it's Adams Central schools, Adams County schools, and then everybody else in the ACAC.
Yeah, Woodland and Heritage. I want to see Kobe Meyer's been very dominant, and we knew he was going to be very good this season. I want to see him against a better defensive team that's going to finish top half of the conference because not that he can't do it, I just want to see it happen. Yeah,
definitely. And you look at Woodland, and they had a good bounce back week too. They came back and got a win, and those are two teams too that are kind of in that middle. And you look at Heritage and be like, man, year 4 under Coach Kolkman, and everybody knows what to expect. And Kobe Meyer is lighting it up through the first 2 weeks of the season and convincing win over Fairfield and a difficult offense to prepare for. So Heritage is one of those teams with intrigue too. Woodland as well. There's a lot of storylines in the ACAC that even in week 3 and years past, we're kind of like, all right, it's going to come down to week 5 or week 6, whatever it is when Adams Central at South Adams play.
Let's talk about the NECC before we jump on the SAC. Churubusco at Garrett, kind of a rivalry game there. You've got West Noble at Eastside, perhaps the prohibitive favorite in the big school division, taking on a team that has dominated the small school division in years past. Central Noble at Fairfield, John Glenn at Angola, and Lakeland at Prairie Heights. I want to circle back to the West Noble Eastside game because Eastside is coming off a 42-7 loss at home, but to a very good Adams Central team.
Right.
You figure there are probably some growing pains with Alex Brandoe in his first year as the head coach. That's just natural.
Right.
But West Noble has looked really, really good the first couple of weeks in this 2023 season. What's your take on the Chargers?
Well, we looked at West Noble last year and said, man, all of their skill players that performed for them were back this year. And you said, man, this is a group that really could be really good. And they've done nothing through the first 2 weeks of the season to make us change our mind on that. And Seth Pruitt has just been running roughshod over defenses. They've been able to be balanced offensively with a passing attack. The defense has been tremendous. And you look at this, like West Noble, big or small division, are they the most complete team in the NECC at this point? And that's why I think we'll get some evidence of that on Friday, because you really have to like what Coach Mayholder has up at West Noble this year.
And, in years past, we've said big or small, it feels like East Side was the best team in the NECC, despite being in the small school division. This could very well be the two teams that win the division championships, I think.
Yeah, definitely could. And, of course, with the division format, doesn't hurt you in your division record this week, but could be very telling on maybe in the hierarchy of the NECC earlier in the season, who slots in where, because West Noble has looked absolutely tremendous through the first 2 weeks.
Let's talk about the SAC now. Not a lot of uber compelling games when you take a look at these games. Carroll's at Southside, Bishop Luers is at Northrop, Snyder is at Concordia, Homestead's at Wayne, and Northside is at Bishop Dwenger. I want to chat a little bit about those last two games, because I don't know how much we know about Homestead at this point. They played Carmel really well. If it wasn't for a pick six in the fourth quarter, that game was tied 7-7 in the season opener, but then go down in 42-0 against Noblesville.
That was surprising to me.
Yeah, I thought it was surprising as well. And then this Wayne team, if Wayne beats Homestead on Friday, that's 3 wins this season. The Generals won only 2 games last year, and we thought they were pretty decent last year with Nelson at running back and the cavalcade of receivers that they have that are now back. So are we going to learn anything about either of these two teams on Friday night when Homestead and Wayne meet?
Yeah, I think so, because I don't think Wayne has been challenged defensively yet. Consistently too. You play Attucks and you play Northrop. And I think there's some individuals on both of those teams, but not consistently over 4 quarters you really have to perform. And that was kind of the bugaboo with Wayne last year, is they can move the ball. Lamarion Nelson ran over everybody. They had some threats in the passing game. They just couldn't stop anybody defensively. So I know when you look at Homestead and you say they're relatively young on the offensive side, but that's going to be the biggest test for Wayne this week, is how good Homestead looks. Homestead needs to bounce back too. This is a team that after week 1, like you said, we're like, hey, Homestead pretty decent. They played Carmel tough. Then they go down to Noblesville and you're like, that could be a team that wins on the road. And then you see a halftime score and I'm like, wait, what? Like,
I thought it'd be competitive.
All right, at least competitive. And now you're back to, okay, I don't know what Homestead is at this point. So I think that's a game that we'll find out a lot about both teams. And then conversely, Northside, Bishop Dwenger. Bishop Dwenger wants to forget the first 2 weeks of the season. I think Northside wants to forget the first 2 weeks of the season in the sense that they haven't been completely healthy. But at the same time, when you're missing Bronte Johnson, I know how big of an impact player he is, but Northside through the first 2 weeks is more than just one player away from looking like they did last year. This is a team that I know had 2 challenging games to start the season, but you looked at the start of the season and said, well, the small division is Northside's to lose. After 2 weeks, even without playing a conference game, you're going, well, Wayne looks a heck of a lot better than Northside does right now. So I think this is it's never a must win because they're in different divisions, but you have to think 0-3 is going to hurt really bad either if you're Dwenger or Northside, because then internally,
you got to get the ball
things
going.
start falling apart, right?
Yeah, and, for Northside, everyone's talking about Tay, but like the missing Jordan King has been key, because I saw them in person in week 1 against Northridge and not being able to dominate. We talked about the skill guys that they've had for years, but when they really were able to put it together, we saw it last year because of the running back position with Jonte Lambert over 2,000 yards. It was Jordan King and those guys on the offensive line that finally, the elevation of the offensive line allowed the whole program to take a step up. And without him as the heart and soul of that offensive line, he's going to Purdue. He's a Big Ten lineman. He's the best lineman in the area. Without him, I feel like they missed Tay, but they missed Jordan King almost, perhaps just as much. Yeah,
if not more, because when we look at we love to talk about skill position players and receivers and quarterbacks. It comes down to the lines, right? You look at Northside, they've struggled up front this year. That's why they're 0-2. And when they won 8 games last year, you said, man, their offensive and defensive lines are pretty solid. Dwenger is 0-2 because that's an un-Dwenger-like offensive front and defensive front. They're just small compared to Dwenger teams of old. You look at Carroll and you say, man, they can't protect Jimmy Sullivan, and how they need to shore that up to have long-term success this season. It starts up front on both sides of the football. You're seeing evidence in the SAC of who the have and have-nots are. Snyder, just dominant on both sides of the football through the first 2 weeks. That's why they're so good. In the SAC, it comes down to that. We love to talk about the stud players, the star players, the guys that score touchdowns and all that, but it comes down to the trenches, and we can see this team's having trouble because of their lack of ability in the trenches, and this team's having success because they're solid in the trenches.
Yeah, and Talking about Carroll, though, man, Warren Central's defensive ends are pretty good.
Yeah, they're
the
pretty
Burris
decent.
kid, I was like, hey, this guy looks pretty good. I looked him up on Rivals that night, and I was like, oh, been offered by Iowa
Yeah,
and
no
IU
wonder.
and Louisville, and I was like, oh, yeah, I've got a great eye for talent. Doesn't take much. Final question for this week. What are you most looking forward to about this Friday? Because like we said at the top of the show, conference play in earnest is kicking off,
Yeah.
especially for Northeast State, ACAC, and NECC to a certain degree.
Well, I think I'm eager to start getting a clear hierarchy in the NE8 and ACAC about where we stand. We think in the ACAC it's Adams Central and everybody else. You can make a case for multiple teams in the NE8, but now that we're getting into league play this week, we can start making tangible assumptions and getting results to really kind of look at it and say, this team looks better than this team beat this team. I think it's going to be entertaining now as we get into league play in those two conferences. SAC to a certain extent, but with the division format, of course, it's not as compact and concrete as that. But when you look at the SAC, you already say, okay, is it Snyder, Carroll, and everybody else? But I think there's a lot more questions in the NE8 and ACAC.
Definitely. We'll try to answer some of those questions on Friday night with the Highlight Zone. But, of course, we'll talk it all over on Monday with Justin next week. For Justin, I'm Glenn, and we'll see you next Monday.